Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and this is day 31 of a build a day until they announce DLC. That's right, we're doing a build or build related video every day until they announce DLC. Hopefully we get that announcement sometime soon. And for today, we're covering the Sacred Relic Sword. Now, the Sacred Relic Sword is the one you get from the Remembrance of Elden Beast at the end of the game. I know, spoilers, but we're using the final boss's weapon for the purpose of this video, and the weapon art is called Wave of Gold. Wave of Gold actually has some knockdown factor too that you're going to see here. It is pure holy damage. We're going to talk about the scaling in a little bit. By the way, this is where you get the Golden Order Greatsword, and that's going to be something I'm doing for a build this week as well, possibly in the next video. Now, we'll talk about the scaling a little bit here. For the scaling, this is mainly a Dex Faith weapon. However, the weapon art is almost entirely, if not completely, Faith from my testing and from a little bit of reading as well. So if you want to use the weapon art, utilize it for its best, spam the weapon art essentially, go high faith, minimum dex, and you're going to get a lot of damage out of the weapon art. Don't mind me, by the way, at the end of this fight I get my butt kicked a little bit because I wasn't paying attention to my stamina bar. Now this is a little bit stamina costly on the weapon art. That's one of the downsides that I can say about it, and it is a little FP costly too, but it does do a lot of damage to the majority of bosses in the game, and it has that awesome knockdown factor as well. This is a weapon that does a lot of damage with the weapon art, as we mentioned. Obviously, as I mentioned, it scales almost entirely with Faith, and of course it can be buffed as well, so we're going to go over that too. We're using Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri to generically buff it by another 40% on the weapon art. We came up with a good talisman setup we're going to go over in a little bit, and also I wanted to mention here, you're going to see something if you didn't know this, but I'm sure you already do. For the death birds, holy damage will always do additional damage to them, so if you're rocking a holy weapon, it's fantastic to use against any of the death-right birds in all of Eldenring. Wave of Gold is obviously easy to use as well. As far as the actual wave goes, it has a really wide range and it goes quite far as well that you can see here. It does a lot of damage too. Obviously this bird takes additional damage, but between the distance, the damage, and the widespread, it's a very convenient Ash of War, hence one of the reasons why we're going to go over too. It's fantastic for rune farming. Well, did I mention NPC invaders? Well, there's a couple of NPC invaders in this video I wanted to show because although sometimes I'll miss or their dodge, we'll end up being able to knock them down almost every time with the weapon art, and then by the time they get back up, you can pretty much knock them down again. It has that ability and it does fantastic damage against the majority of them as well, making this a fantastic weapons for mobs and NPC invaders and for basically clearing out areas in the game that otherwise you may have difficulty with. Some of the NPC invaders and whatnot that may be giving you trouble, you can completely destroy them with this weapon art. It really is fantastic for that, and sometimes they'll roll right into it too because once again it has such a wide spread, goes a fairly good amount of distance as well, that it can knock them down most of the time, take massive damage from it as well, and you're able to pretty much have control of most of the fights while using this awesome weapon art. Yeah, this is a fun one, and one of the reasons why it is a popular weapon and one of the more popular holy weapons, again, holy is the most resisted type in the game, is because the weapon art is quite good. It does have that wide spread we talked about, can pretty much hit anything, clear out mobs like crazy, and does decent damage to bosses as well, which you're going to see more of here. We're on Journey 5, by the way, and we're going to take on one of the more difficult field bosses in the Ice Dragon. Obviously, he does a ridiculous amount of frost damage, but that's alright because we do a ridiculous amount of holy damage and we have a lot of range on the weapon as well. And the range on the weapon comes into factor here once again because it does have very, very good range, and obviously it has a good amount of power as well, like showcasing the weapon, but mainly the weapon art. That's what I do for most of my videos because a lot of what makes weapons unique is the weapon art, and this one's no exception for Faith builds. Another interesting thing about this that I'll talk about in a little bit, I guess I should talk about it now though, as far as the build setup goes, is you can actually go to 23 strength. It depends on whether you're staying at 150 because those stats can be a little bit tight, but if you're somebody who keeps leveling up in PvE, you can go for 23 strength, and you can switch to the Blasphemous Blade setup for the late game bosses and use Wave of Gold for the majority of Eldenring, the rest of Eldenring. They are very, very close stats wise. Both Ashes of War scale entirely or almost entirely with the Faith stat. So here we're on to mobs, and this is where the weapon really shines. This is where I can actually say, in all honesty, that this is a very good weapon for mobs, if not one of the best weapons in the game. It can wipe the majority of mobs off the map entirely. Yeah, as far as the physical damage on the weapon, by the way, we're going to talk about that in a second too. The physical damage scales almost purely with Dex, much more with Dex than it does with your Faith stat, a little bit of Faith. As far as the weapon art, as we mentioned, it's pretty much entirely Faith. However, if you're going to use a weapon like this, I suggest going minimum Dex and investing heavily in Faith That way you get the holy damage out of it anyway. On the one side, a little bit of a benefit there. And then the weapon art gets buffed and does a lot of damage because it's scaling with your faith stat. And we're going to go over stats, equipment, everything you know in short order here. And I just wanted to mention we're going to show the farm spot first. I know a lot of people know this, but this is one of the benefits to using this weapon art. Obviously, we're going to have to show it, is the fact that you can farm the Arbonax, or however you say it, Mogwin's Palace, with massive, massive damage to all of them. Pretty much kill every single one of them, get a ton of runes along the way with the awesome weapon art. Now for the physical damage on the weapon, we're going to show it here. It's decent, still hitting them for around 1,000 with just the base dex and a bunch of holy invested in the faith stat. So it's not too bad, but obviously the weapon art's going to get us much more of it. We're going to show it here in a second. And you can see the physical damage on the weapon is not too bad, but obviously when you're going to go to farm these guys, you're going to use the weapon art, and I'll show you in a second where I stand generally. You're going to get a ton of runes from doing this. Yeah, you'll get a lot of runes out of this weapon art on this bridge. It's absolutely awesome doing this because you just get an insane amount. I haven't farmed this in a long time because I'm not really going for max level or anything, but if you're doing that, that's generally where I stand. You can pretty much wipe everyone out. Now let's get into equipment. Now for equipment, we have the Sacred Relic Sword plus 10, any seal will do. We have the Knight's Cavalry set, Sacred Scorpion Charm for the holy damage boost, Ritual Swords Talisman for the generic damage boost, Shard of Alexander for the weapon art, which is obviously what we're using, Dragoncrest, and then you want to use the holy tier as well, in either the faith tier or defense tier. For stats, I'll be doing this one in the Golden Order Greatsword on my level 200 character because he had a lot of the early and mid-game stuff open, and Holy is just better against him. It really has a big drop-off in the late game, but for this, you just want to go for minimum dex and then at least 60 faith, and you're going to get pretty good damage, actually fantastic damage, out of the weapon art. Everything else is up to you as far as stats go. Just keep in mind what I said before. If you go for 23 strength, you can switch it out for the Blasphemous Blade for the final few bosses without having to respec whatsoever, since both Ashes of War scale primarily with faith. Now let's get into buffs. For buffs, we're drinking our tier first. Then we're going to cast the longer stuff like Golden Vow, Blessings Boon, obviously optional. Then we're going to use Howl Shabriri for 25% generic boost to the weapon art. And then we get to use that awesome weapon art and Wave of Gold that we've boosted by almost double the damage between the talismans and the extra buffs that we added to it. And obviously Wave of Gold is something you're going to get very good damage out of. And that is day 31 of a build a day until they announce DLC. That's right, we're doing a build or build related video every day until they announce DLC. We're going to see how far we can go with this. Definitely be sure to sub. By the way, I lost my voice a little bit, had a little bit of a cold the past couple of days, so it's been a little bit more challenging if you noticed, but I think I've been getting through it decently. This was a pretty good build for another awesome weapon in Eldenring. If you love From Software games, if you love Eldenring in general, if you love overpowered PvE builds, definitely check out all of the awesome builds on the channel. There's so many on there now. Thanks for watching, everybody, and as usual, I will catch you guys there.